My wealthy in-laws, who spent a decade making me feel like Alex's little project, arrived on my doorstep begging for help, their kingdom crumbling. They had no idea I'd already bought their castle. The look on my mother-in-law's face was a masterpiece of defeated pride. She sat on my cream-colored sofa, the one she'd once called aggressively beige, looking small and lost. The expensive handbag she always carried, a symbol of her status, was clutched in her lap like a shield, but the shield was full of holes. Beside her, my father-in-law, Richard, stared at his polished shoes, the picture of a king who'd just been deposed. For 10 years, they had been the monarchs of my husband Alex's life, and by extension mine. Their kingdom was their sprawling two-story colonial house in the most exclusive suburb of town. It wasn't just a house. It was a monument to their supposed superiority, a fortress from which they judged the world, and especially me. When Alex first brought me home to meet them, I could feel their disapproval radiating off them in waves. I came from a working-class family. My parents were wonderful, loving people who had taught me the value of hard work and kindness, but they didn't have a portfolio of stocks or a membership at the country club. I was, in Veronica's thinly veiled words, Alex's little project. At our wedding, a beautiful ceremony we paid for ourselves, she'd made a show of complimenting my dress, then whispered to a cousin, loud enough for me to hear, "It's amazing what you can do with a sewing machine and a bit of hope, isn't it?" Every family dinner was a minefield of backhanded compliments and condescending questions about my career in graphic design. "Is that a real job, dear? Does it pay the bills?" Richard would ask, while Veronica would just smile a tight, reptilian smile. They never thought I was good enough for their son, and they made sure I knew it. They believed their wealth and status made them invincible. Richard was a financial advisor, a title he brandished like a weapon. He managed his own money, and according to him, he was a genius at it. He'd lecture Alex and me about our frivolous spending on a vacation, or our decision to buy a modest starter home instead of leveraging ourselves to the hilt for a mansion we couldn't afford. "You have to think bigger, son," he'd say, puffing out his chest. "It takes money to make money." Well, it also takes money to lose money, and it turned out Richard was a genius at that too. A series of disastrous, high-risk investments, all made to fuel their lavish lifestyle and keep up with their even wealthier friends, had finally caught up to them. The invincible kingdom was crumbling. And so, here they were, in my house, sitting on my sofa. Alex was in the kitchen making tea, his way of escaping the suffocating tension. He loved his parents, but he wasn't blind to their faults, and years of defending me had created a deep rift. He'd told them that if they wanted our help, they had to ask me, both of us, as equals. I think a part of him wanted to see them finally humble themselves before the woman they had so thoroughly dismissed. Richard finally cleared his throat. "Elena," he began, his voice lacking its usual boom, "as you know, we've run into some temporary financial headwinds." Headwinds was a cute way of saying they were about to be homeless. The bank had foreclosed on their house, their fortress. Their entire identity was tied up in that property, and it was being auctioned off. "The bank has been completely unreasonable," Veronica chimed in, her voice brittle. "They won't negotiate. After all the years, we've been loyal customers." I just nodded slowly, letting the silence hang in the air. I knew the whole story. I knew they'd been offered multiple modifications, refinancing options, all of which they'd refused out of pure arrogance, believing they could fix it themselves right up until the last minute. They couldn't bear the thought of admitting they were in trouble. "We need your help," Richard said, the words sounding like they were being physically pulled from his throat. "We need a loan, a substantial one, just to stop the auction and get back on our feet. We'll pay you back, of course, with interest." I looked at Veronica. Her eyes were fixed on a painting on my wall, a piece from a local artist I adored. I could practically hear her thoughts. Asking her for money. The little charity case. How did it come to this? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I set the glass down on the coaster, making a soft, clinking sound in the silent room. Alex came back in, placing a tray with tea on the coffee table. He looked at me, his eyes asking a silent question. I gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I was in control. "I'm sorry to hear about your troubles," I said. my voice even and calm. It must be very stressful. Veronica flinched at my pity. But I'm afraid we can't give you a loan. Richard's face fell. Elena, please, it's our home. Everything we have is in that house. I understand, I said, and I do want to help, but a loan isn't the way. I paused, letting them hang on the thread of hope. The house is the problem, but it might also be the solution. Veronica finally looked at me, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. What are you talking about? The auction, Richard said, his voice desperate. It's tomorrow morning. At 10 a.m., it's too late to do anything now. We've lost. He buried his face in his hands, a truly broken man. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped on my knees. I looked from Richard's defeated form to Veronica's terrified, hate-filled face. A slow, cold wave of satisfaction washed over me, a feeling I had waited 10 long years to experience. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the despair like a shard of glass. The auction already happened, this morning. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a housewarming gift from them, intended, I always suspected, as a reminder of how much catching up we had to do. Richard lifted his head from his hands, his face ashen. What are you talking about? It can't have. Our lawyer said it was scheduled for tomorrow. The online portal opened at 9 a.m. this morning, I replied, keeping my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I had practiced this. Imagine this moment 1,000 times. The bank sent you a notification about the change in procedure last week. I suppose it got lost in the mail. I knew for a fact it hadn't. Alex had seen the certified letter sitting on their marble entryway table, unopened, when he'd stopped by 2 days ago. They were too proud, too panicked to face reality. Veronica's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down with a shaking hand. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of aristocratic calm, was cracking. You knew, she whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. You knew this was happening today, and you let us come here. You let us humiliate ourselves and beg you for money. Her gaze hardened, the familiar venom returning to her eyes. This is some kind of sick, cruel game, isn't it? You enjoyed this, watching us squirm. Alex shifted uncomfortably beside me. Mom, that's not fair. Oh, isn't it? She snapped, turning on him. Your wife sits there, cool as you please, and informs us we're homeless, and I'm the one who's not being fair. I held up a hand, stopping Alex before he could argue further. This was between Veronica and me. It always had been. It wasn't a game, Veronica, I said, looking her straight in the eye. It was a reality check. One you've desperately needed for a very long time. My mind flashed back to a Christmas Eve 5 years ago. We were all in their grand dining room, the one with the 20-foot ceilings and the crystal chandelier that dripped light onto the polished mahogany table. I had just announced I'd landed a major client, a national brand, a huge step for my freelance career. Richard had offered a tepid, "Well done, girl," but Veronica had just smiled that tight little smile. She'd chosen that moment to present Alex and me with a framed photo of their house, glittering with snow under the winter moon. A reminder of what you can achieve when you have a real foundation, she'd said, her eyes sweeping over me. A legacy isn't built on, what did you call it, dear? A side hustle? She patted my hand. Some people are builders, and some people are just renters in life. It's important to know which you are. I returned to the present, the memory fueling the cold resolve in my veins. I had been a renter in her world for a decade. But rent, as they were about to learn, was finally due. Richard, meanwhile, had moved past shock and into frantic damage control. Who bought it? Who was the buyer? He demanded, his voice raspy. Was it Steve Miller, that vulture? He always wanted our lot, or the Davidsons. They'd do it just to gloat at the club. He was already rewriting the narrative, recasting their downfall as a drama among their own elite peers, a world I could never possibly understand. In his mind, we were still just the audience. Does it really matter who bought it? I asked calmly. It's gone. Of course it matters. Veronica shrieked, her composure completely gone. Our entire life is in that house. Our furniture, my mother's antiques, everything. We need to know who we're dealing with. We could offer to rent it back from them just for a little while until we. Her voice trailed off as the reality of their situation crashed down on her again. They had nothing to offer. They had no leverage. They looked so lost, so utterly defeated. 10 years of tiny cuts, of condescending remarks, of being made to feel small and unworthy. And here they were, in my home, their fate hanging on my next words. Alex reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, a silent signal of support. He knew what this cost me, and he knew why I had to do it. I let them stew in their own panic for a moment longer. I let them imagine one of their backstabbing friends picking through their belongings, laughing at their misfortune. I let them feel the full, crushing weight of their fall from grace. Then I leaned forward. The property was purchased by a private investment LLC to ensure anonymity, I said, using the precise formal language I'd rehearsed. It's all perfectly legal and completely airtight. You won't be able to find out who the new owner is through public records. Richard deflated. So that's it. It's over. Not necessarily, I said. Veronica's head snapped up, a desperate glimmer of hope in her eyes. As it happens, I continued, a slow smile finally touching my lips, I know the principal investor in the LLC. I have a direct line to the person who now owns your house. A flicker of disbelief, then a wave of desperate hope washed over their faces. It was fascinating to watch. For a decade, they had been the gatekeepers, the ones who held all the keys. The idea that their fate now rested in the hands of some mysterious contact of mine, someone from my world, not theirs, was a complete upending of their universe. You do? Richard stammered, leaning so far forward he was nearly off the sofa. Who? Who is it? Can you talk to them? Maybe we can work something out. An arrangement. We can explain the situation. Of course we'll pay rent, Veronica added quickly, her tone suddenly shifting from imperious to pleading. It was a jarring transformation. Whatever they ask, just until we can sort things out. We just need a little time. All of our memories are there. She was trying to appeal to my sense of sentimentality, a sense she had never once believed I possessed. She was the woman who had suggested we sell my grandmother's wedding ring to help fund a more appropriate engagement ring for Alex. I let them talk, let them spin their frantic plans, their voices overlapping in a clumsy duet of desperation. They were bargaining, not with me, but with a faceless entity they imagined I could control. They saw me as their conduit, their lowly translator to the new gods who had taken their throne. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Please, Elena, Richard said, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was no condescension left, only raw fear. This person, this investor, what do they want with the house? Are they going to flip it, demolish it for a McMansion? They have plans for the property, yes, I said cryptically. Long-term plans. But we could be good tenants, Veronica insisted. We'd be quiet, we'd take care of the grounds. It would be like we were never gone. That was the core of it, wasn't it? They couldn't imagine a world where they weren't the masters of that house. For them, leaving it wasn't just losing a home. It was a form of erasure. I decided it was time. The stage was set. The audience was captive. Alex gave my hand another squeeze. He knew this was the moment I was either going to offer a lifeline or cut the rope entirely. The new owner is particular, I began slowly, choosing my words with the care of a demolition expert wiring a building for implosion. They aren't really interested in having tenants. Their faces fell in unison. The last sliver of hope began to evaporate. But, I continued, drawing the word out, they are willing to be generous. They understand the emotional attachment you have to the house. Generous how? Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. They've authorized me to make you an offer. They know you need a place to stay, and they know you'll need some time to get back on your feet. I paused, letting the silence stretch, savoring the exquisite tension. The new owner is prepared to let you live in the house. Veronica gasped, a hand flying to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes. Real tears, not the crocodile tears I'd seen her deploy at family functions. Oh, thank God. Elena, thank you. Thank this person for us. We'll be eternally grateful." "Yes, eternally grateful," Richard echoed, nodding vigorously. I held up my hand. "Let me finish." Their grateful smiles froze on their faces. "You can live in the house, rent-free, for as long as you need. All utilities will be covered. You won't have to worry about a thing." It was too much. The offer was too good, too impossible. Suspicion began to creep back into Veronica's eyes, wrestling with her relief. "Why?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Why would anyone do that? What's the catch?" "There's no catch," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Just a few conditions. Simple household rules, you could say." Richard narrowed his eyes. "What kind of rules?" "Firstly," I began, ticking them off on my fingers, "the garden. Veronica, you always said my attempts at gardening were pathetic. You'll be in charge of all the landscaping, mowing, weeding, pruning the roses. I hear the hedges are particularly difficult this time of year." Veronica's mouth opened, then closed again. "Secondly, the cooking and cleaning. The house is large, as you know. It will need to be kept in pristine condition. All meals prepared, all laundry done, all floors polished. You always mentioned how a woman's touch is what makes a house a home. Now you'll have plenty of opportunity to prove it." Richard started to speak, a protest forming on his lips, but I cut him off. "And for you, Richard, the new owner has a vintage car, a beautiful but temperamental thing. It needs constant maintenance. Polishing, oil changes, engine tuning. You always bragged about rebuilding that old Porsche in your youth. This should be right up your alley." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at my own modest, perfectly manicured garden. I had planted every flower myself. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. The game was almost over. I turned back to face them. Their expressions were a confused mess of horror, humiliation, and dawning comprehension. "So, to be clear," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority they had never heard from me before, "you can stay in your home. You won't pay a single bill. You will simply be the live-in groundskeeper, the housekeeper, and the mechanic." I let a small, genuine smile finally break through. "You will work for the new owner, and you will, of course, be expected to show the proper respect." Veronica stared at me, her face pale, the pieces clicking into place behind her eyes like the tumblers of a lock. You said you have a direct line to this person," she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that was slowly overpowering her fear. "That you know them." "Oh, I do," I said, walking back toward the sofa and looking down at them, these two giants who had suddenly become so very small. "I know them intimately." The dawning horror in Veronica's eyes was everything I had imagined and more. Her mind, so quick to judge and dismiss, was finally connecting the dots. Richard was a step behind, his brow furrowed in confusion, still trying to process the logic of a world turned upside down. "What are you saying, Elena? Who is this person? Just tell us the name." I looked from Richard's baffled face to Veronica's, which was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She knew. She didn't want to believe it, but she knew. "The name of the LLC that bought your house," I said, enunciating each word with crystal clarity, "is OA Legacy Holdings." Richard just stared blankly. "OA? What does that stand for?" Veronica made a choked sound, a strangled mix of a sob and a gasp. "Olga," she whispered, her eyes locked on mine. She remembered. She remembered the name of my grandmother, the one whose ring she had scorned, Olga Abramova, the woman who had scrubbed floors and worked in a factory after immigrating to this country with nothing, all to give her daughter, my mother, a chance at a better life, a real foundation, a real legacy. "Olga," Veronica repeated, her voice trembling as the full weight of the situation crashed down upon her. "You?" My mother-in-law froze. The queen on her crumbling throne had just learned the name of the peasant who had stormed the castle. It wasn't one of her rivals from the country club. It wasn't a faceless corporation. It was me, Alex's little project, the renter in life. "How?" Richard sputtered, finally catching up. "How could you possibly afford it? The house is worth millions." I smiled, a real, genuine smile this time. It felt warm and liberating. "It's amazing what you can do with a side hustle and a bit of hope, isn't it? My graphic design business, the one you both found so quaint, it took off. That national brand I landed 5 years ago became my cornerstone client. I built a team. We won awards. I invested, Richard, carefully. I didn't chase high-risk pipe dreams. I built something solid, brick by brick, pixel by pixel. While you were leveraging your legacy to impress people you didn't even like, I was quietly building my own. Alex, who had been watching this all unfold with a quiet intensity, finally spoke. "We tried to tell you," he said, his voice firm but tinged with a deep sadness. "We tried to help you see this was coming, but you wouldn't listen. You never listen." Veronica sprang to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "This is a joke, a sick, twisted fantasy. You expect us to be your servants, in our own home?" "It's not your home anymore, Veronica," I said calmly, not rising to meet her anger. "It's my asset. And yes, that is the offer on the table. You can stay under my roof and under my rules, or you can leave. The choice is yours. There's a very nice, very clean one-bedroom apartment for rent above a laundromat 2 towns over. I've already put down the first month's deposit for you just in case. Consider it a parting gift." The fight seemed to drain out of her all at once. The thought of that apartment, the sheer indignity of it, was a blow from which her pride could not recover. She sank back onto the sofa, looking utterly defeated. Richard just stared into the middle distance, the architect of his own ruin. The silence lingered. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the hour, each bong a funeral toll for their old life. I didn't do this out of pure revenge. Well, maybe a little, but mostly I did it because it was the only way. The only way to break the cycle. The only way to protect my husband from the endless drain of their arrogance and my future children from their poison. They had built their kingdom on a foundation of judgment and scorn. Now they would learn what it was to live on humility and grace, or they would have nothing at all. Weeks turned into months. To my genuine surprise, they stayed. The first few days were a tense, silent war. Veronica would slam cabinets and weed the garden with a furious energy, yanking out dandelions as if they were my effigies. Richard would sulk in the garage, tinkering with my vintage convertible with a resentful air. But slowly, something shifted. One afternoon, I came home to find Veronica on her hands and knees in the rose garden, carefully tending to the bushes she had always loved. She looked up, her face smudged with dirt, and for the first time, there was no malice in her eyes, just weariness. "The aphids are bad this year," she said, and it was the first normal sentence she had spoken to me in a decade. Richard discovered a genuine passion for restoring the old car. He started talking to me about carburetors and spark plugs, sharing a part of himself that wasn't tied to stock prices or country club gossip. Alex and I would come over for dinner on Sundays, dinners they now cooked. The food was simple, but it was offered without commentary or judgment. We were just a family, sitting at a table. They aren't my servants. I pay them a generous stipend for the upkeep, more than enough to live on and save. I didn't want to crush them. I wanted to humble them. I wanted them to understand that a person's worth isn't measured by the size of their house or the name on their handbag. It's measured by their resilience, their character, their ability to adapt when their world crumbles. The other day, I brought over a framed photo and set it on the mantelpiece in the grand living room. It wasn't a picture of the house. It was a small, black-and-white photograph of my grandmother, Olga, standing proudly in front of her first tiny apartment, a look of fierce determination on her face. Veronica saw me place it there. She walked over, looked at the photo, then looked at me. "She was a builder," Veronica said, her voice quiet. I nodded. Yes, she was. A silent understanding passed between us. Their house was no longer a monument to their superiority. It was just a house again. And under its roof, two very different families were slowly, painstakingly building a new foundation. Not of wealth or status, but of something far more valuable and far more real.